Sankhya is a belief system from ancient India that was foundational to the formation of yoga, Buddhism, and Ayurveda. Hi, my name is John Immel, and I'm the director of Joyful Belly Ayurveda. This is what I look like. Do you believe that stillness equals holiness? That maturity means remaining calm in every situation? Do you believe that spiritual transformation comes from increasing your level of conscious awareness? Do you believe that most of human behavior is a social construct and that you should never judge anything, no matter what? Do you believe that an open mind is a better mind? If you answered yes to some or all of these questions, you may have been influenced by Sankhya philosophy, either directly or indirectly. Sankhya philosophy, as I mentioned, is the philosophical root of yoga, Ayurveda, and Buddhism, and it's had influence even on Western civilization throughout the ages as well. Have you ever wondered why a yoga class feels different than a Pilates class, or even just a stretch at the gym? If yes, then this lecture is for you. As yoga has become more popular in the West, yoga's cultural influence has spread with it. And as the roots of yoga culture change Western culture, it's all the more important to know the root of the kind of changes taking place and where these ideas come from. Sankhya's worldview is infused into yoga classes. Even if your yoga teacher teaches a class that has no spiritual component, there's still something that feels different when you take a yoga class from an average stretch. And everybody can feel this, everybody knows this, but we should talk about what that difference is. Some specific examples or things in a yoga class that promote that feeling might be something like corpse pose or chanting Om, or even the whole room being very calm. Maybe there is a background calming ambient music during the class. The idea that calming the mind is something that's a spiritual thing is itself part of Sankhya. Meditation is a part of Sankhya. Some of these same feelings, these that are present in a yoga class, are also present in Buddhist meditation. And that makes Buddhist meditation a little bit different than simple mindfulness, for example. Teachers are often not aware that this difference comes from Sankhya's main ideas, Sankhya's main principles. And so for any yoga teacher, or for anyone who wants to know what yoga believes, this lecture is going to be very helpful. And we're going to walk through the basic principles of Sankhya. But before I do that, I want to point out some resources. You can get the ancient texts that describe what Sankhya is online just by Googling it. And for students in our health counselor program, I just want to mention, or anyone who uses Ayurveda, that you're not required to believe in or agree with Sankhya in order to practice Ayurveda. Even though Sankhya's influence was formative in some of the basic parts of Ayurveda, most of Ayurveda's methods have very little intersection with Sankhya's spiritual goals. So yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more. But as in any world religion class, this lecture aims to help you understand the basic tenets of Sankhya, the historical context where Ayurveda was created, and also I want to let you know that in modern India, since so many people there are following Sankhya's main principles, many Ayurveda practitioners also have this belief system. But Ayurveda actually has some important differences from Sankhya that we're going to review. Finally, before we get started, I'm going to acknowledge the difficulties of analyzing the philosophy of another culture. Yes, I spent 10 years becoming fluent in a Sanskrit-based language and can read the ancient texts Yes, I've spent a lot of time researching Indian culture and have spent years living with Indian families and also overseas living in India, and have a yoga certification degree, and I've been practicing Ayurveda for 10 years on top of that. I still want to acknowledge the difficulties of analyzing the philosophy of another culture. All right, well, let's get into it. What is Sankhya, and how is it used practically? First of all, Sankhya is the oldest and most influential of the 6 Indian philosophies of life. And it's thought to be developed by a person named Kapila around 700 BC. Kapila was considered one of the most enlightened seers or rishis. Each of those 6 Indian philosophies shaped Ayurveda, but Sankhya has undoubtedly had the greatest influence. Ultimately, Sankhya aims to reveal the universal truth about reality, or its idea of that truth. So, to get started, imagine the world was a piece of clay that you could shape into anything you wanted. Now imagine that you yourself, your true self, according to Sankhya, is a great big eye, that you are an eye. Except this eye is not just like an eyeball, it's more like a projector. Like in the same way a movie projector projects an image onto a screen, the eye, you, as the eye, project an image of reality onto the clay. And after that, your eye only sees the image. When you're watching a movie, you don't think about the screen, you just see the image of the movie. And so, similarly, this great big eye sees only the image, not the screen. It sees the clay, or the shape, the way that the clay has been shaped, instead of the clay itself. So to Sankhya philosophy, the clay and the eye are real, but the image projected onto the clay is an illusion. That image projected onto the clay is reality, right? What Sankhya sees as the created reality. So Sankhya is a theology of perspective. You might have already guessed that already, but it's this spirituality entirely organized around expanding your perspective. What Sankhya is really saying is that everything that you know about reality is really just your own projection, your own perspective. And I'll refer you to this image on the right here. When you look at this image, do you see an old woman or a young woman? And depending on how you look at it, you can find both. I'll give you a little hint there. This eye can either be the eye of the old woman or the ear of the young woman. So check that out and see if you can find both images there. So Sankhya says that nothing you see is actually real because it is just the projection of what you want to see. When you look at this photo, do you see 2 people looking at each other, or do you see a vase, for example? Sankhya says that to become enlightened, you have to undo all mental constructs, undo all desires, and recognize that reality is all just clay, or that it's all just energy, which is in India is called prana, that it's all prana beneath that. And here you see a person sitting in meditation with their chakras all aligned up and bright, and the reality they're sitting in is what? It's almost like this energy field, right? That's what Sankhya's vision is. So Sankhya is all about metaphysics, which is a branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things. What is reality? What is substance? What is time and space, etc.? And so he's asking some of the similar questions that Plato asked, one of the great Greek philosophers from the Stoic tradition. So this Sankhya's idea is very similar, actually, to Plato's idea of the shadows on the wall of a cave, that all you see is reflections of reality, not reality itself. And here you see a slightly blurry image of Plato's cave. So where does such a philosophy come from? Well, philosophies aren't usually created in a box. In fact, they're usually a response to a social problem. Not always a social problem, but I don't know. Without actually knowing what Kapila was thinking when he created this, I worked to imagine what was the social problem that this philosophy was trying to address. Anyway, you may know communism, right? Communism is a philosophy created by Karl Marx, and that was a response to the social issues of capitalism at the time. And so he was trying to come up with a solution to rampant capitalism, whether you agree with his solution or not. And similarly with Sankhya, whether you agree with it or not, I just wonder if Sankhya's ideas came, from some social issue. I've always imagined that Kapila had a teenager who thought that he or she was a know-it-all, and then systematized this philosophy to challenge that person's perspective. Or that Kapila was hanging out with a group of people that were arguing with each other, and each person thought they were right. And so Kapila said, forget it, guys, and concluded that there is no truth at all, in order to get them to stop arguing. Now, whether you agree with Kapila's solution or not, I've always wondered, well, was Kapila's system trying to, come up with a solution to some real problem? In general, Indian systems of philosophy are heavily focused on a person's perspective and their way of seeing. And that's because they're all about becoming enlightened, and they're all about awareness. To most of the Indian philosophies, spiritual transformation and enlightenment are the same thing. And of course, that looks spiritual transformation looks very different in other cultures. Anyways, on a practical level, Sankhya is saying, here's a method to have greater perspective, to overcome suffering and be less selfish, right? So some good aims underlying Sankhya. And it is true, right, that how we perceive our world has a big influence on how we interact with our world. Behavior, another way of saying that is behavior follows belief. If you don't like something, everyone's going to know, it's going to be written on your face, and, it may cause conflict. And if you like something, that may open doors, and etc. What Sankhya is saying is, you can't make any assumptions. Don't assume you know the ultimate truth. To stay humble. And then Sankhya goes a little further, actually, and says, eliminate your ego entirely, because it's all just an illusion anyway. Sankhya says that the only truth is that reality is like clay. It has no attributes. And this is another way of Sankhya saying that no one person's way is better than any other, and that anyone who thinks their way is the best is just biased. So does that perspective sound familiar? Have you seen that on social media, or don't judge me, things like that? If you've seen things like that out and about, then Sankhya is one of the spiritualities that, or one of the philosophies that turns that belief into a spiritual belief. Sankhya proposes a map of spiritual advancement that's based on your level of conscious awareness. And right there, we should think of that's this really surprising claim. Well, maybe the word shouldn't be surprising, but just that is just it's a unique claim, right? That other systems will say, oh, your level of spiritual advancement is based on good acts, or your belief in a certain god, or something like that. But Sankhya says it's all about your level of knowledge and conscious awareness. And so that's Sankhya's spiritual hierarchy. At the top end of their hierarchy is pure consciousness and liberation from yourself, or transcendence, which is called moksha. And that's considered by Sankhya to be the ultimate aim of all your life. In other words, you should spend your entire life becoming more aware. At the lower end of Sankhya's hierarchy is a dumb rock, right? Basically, something that's non-sentient and lacking in self-awareness. And, there may be a person in your life that you consider to be not very smart. Well, in Sankhya's worldview, that person would be less spiritual than the other person. Sankhya seeks liberation, or moksha, which is freedom from all mental constructs. And there's a little quote here talking about that as the unconscious milk functions for the sake of the nourishment of the calf, so Prakriti functions for the sake of moksha of the spirit, right? So that, so this is just talking about how moksha is the goal. Well, what do you think? Does enlightenment equal holiness? Or do you think love equals holiness? Do you think pursuit of knowledge is the holier way to go? Or charitable acts? Do you think devotion to a god is how you become holy? Or do you think devotion to your family is how you become holy? Etc. There's different ways or different ideas on how to be holy. And for Sankhya, it's about enlightenment. What about this idea that it's all just a social construct? What do you think about that? Are some things inherently good and others objectively bad? And here I have a picture of heroin. What do there's been a lot of controversy in the press lately around marijuana. Some people say it's good, some people say it's bad. What about guns? What about heroin? What about the use of antibiotics? What about eating at McDonald's, right? Do you think that there are some things that are inherently good and other things that are objectively bad? Or, in your view, is it all subjective? Is it all just personal? Is it all just something that you decide with your own opinion? Sankhya, as a philosophy, is known for its theory of gunas, which means qualities or innate tendencies. And here I pose the question, what makes a tree a tree? Well, the tree's nature. And how does Sankhya describe that nature? Through gunas, which are basically qualities, like hot or cold, or having the shape of an elephant, or having the shape of a chair is also a quality. Your way of thinking is a quality. And the interplay between these qualities, or gunas, determine the nature of something, according to Sankhya. So, if you're an Ayurvedic practitioner, that should sound really familiar, because Ayurveda is all about gunas. And that's how Sankhya influenced Ayurveda most profoundly, is in this theory of gunas, and in a few other areas too. Anyway, Sankhya was the first philosophy in India to codify and systematize the theory of gunas. Just like Plato and Aristotle did something very similar in the West, introducing the concept of forms and categories. Sankhya fundamentally sees that reality is made up of two different things, consciousness and matter, the I and the clay that I talked about earlier. And the I, or the consciousness, or the seer, is Purusha, and matter, or the clay, or the created world, is Prakriti. And what is this I trying to do? The I is trying to figure things out. The I is trying to enjoy the clay. And here we see a person going on an adventure up on a mountain here. So people in general desire experiences in order to learn, or because the experience is pleasurable in some way, to get what they want, even also to grow their mind. And sometimes people even use the word evolve, which is actually a term that I don't always like to use, because I think it is can be strange. But anyway, that this idea that people desire experiences in order to evolve. So a teenager, take for example, wants to experiment with a drug, or wants to spend a year in Paris, or have a sexual experience, or dye their hair blue, or go on an adventure, etc. People want to go out and experience something, go to a party, or the people are fundamentally seeking experiences for pleasure, to get what they want, or to nourish their mind. And unfortunately, like the teenager who's out there exploring, the teenager can forget where they came from. If they move to Paris for a year, they may start thinking they're French instead of, the small town where they came from. And so as this all-seeing eye goes out on its adventures, and the eye of the true self, wants to have all these new experiences, it eventually forgets its true nature, which in Sankhya is its nature as being a witness, as simply consciousness itself. So what happens is that this I identifies with the experience instead of and kind of loses its perspective. Like the teenager saying, "Mom, blue hair is really important to me," or "My heart is calling me to Paris," or "I am big and strong." Right? Those are all different statements that we can make about ourselves, and Sankhya says all of those things are illusions. That basically what's happening when you say that is that some part of the reality, some part, is seen as representing the whole. And so what you're seeing is really just a fragment, which is what I meant to convey in this image here on the slide, that some part of the reality gets seen as representing the whole, and that creates a kind of bondage or a narrowing of the person's perspective. And it also creates an imbalance in the gunas. So now, because you're seeing the world in a certain way, instead of the clay just being clay, it acquires a particular shape. Such as here, this clay has been shaped into the face of a person. All right, so I've presented the basic of the philosophy, and let's just answer first how this philosophy is helpful, and then we'll challenge it a little bit. First of all, the philosophy challenges teenagers, adults, etc. as to why they want to do something. Are you just seeking more experiences? Is this really going to be good for you, or is it, or are you just doing mindless, needless experiments? It asks you to think critically about your reasoning behind creative acts. Do you really need to spend a year in Paris to be fulfilled? But Sankhya's view is also a little bit pessimistic about the creation of the universe. It basically claims that all of truth, all of reality, and all of universe is created out of the ignorant projection of your own wants, needs, and desires. And I think that's a little harsh. So reality, according to Sankhya, is just an illusion created by you. And so the question is, does that make the whole universe a mistake? The word Sankhya literally means number or enumeration, and Sankhya's theory of natural evolution is presented as a map that charts the development of consciousness into matter. And here's what the map looks like. And I'm going to go through and explain this map, and I'm just going to also mention that Ayurveda Health Counselor students are required to memorize this map. What is Sankhya? So Sankhya, that map includes 24 evolved states of consciousness or matter called tattvas. And like I said, we're going to go through each of them here.